in from the city of Seattle, where they have been having a lot of problems, as reported there, with members of the indigent community. But what we're hearing now is that 4 people have been shot. That 4 people have been shot in Seattle. Apparently, it happened in an area that included a Metro bus driver. This is according to police. At least 1 person is confirmed dead. 4 people have been shot in Seattle. The story's being confirmed already by the police chief, Carmen Best, there. Apparently, it happened on Metro Route 75. For those.
Today, the opposition in Guyana submitted an appeal with the Caribbean Court of Justice. They want to reverse a Court of Appeal decision that says the no-confidence motion passed against the Guyanese government is not legitimate. Joining us now to explain what's happening in Guyana and why it actually matters a lot here in the U.S. is RT correspondent Michelle Greenstein. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle. It's your debut here on Newsviews and News. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to bring you on with this story because nobody really is covering it, and yet it really is going to have an impact on our military and as well as our political advancement in Venezuela and why we're involved in Venezuela. So let's just start off. Where is Guyana?
I think that's exactly the question to be asking, and I brought a map along to illustrate just that. And this is why it's very important to the story that you actually just led with about Venezuela. So Guyana actually borders Venezuela as well as Brazil and Suriname. Let's take a look at this map here. So even though people from Guyana actually call themselves Caribbean, it's actually not an island. There it is right there. But what's basically really interesting about this story is that there's a border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana that's actually been happening since the 1800s. At the time, the country was controlled by Great Britain, and they couldn't agree on where their border was. But that dispute actually just fell to the wayside after it was discovered that the International Court was colluding with Great Britain. But now that dispute has actually been reopened in recent years because ExxonMobil made an announcement after Guyana gave it a contract to explore for oil in Guyana. It discovered about 4 or 5 billion barrels, and that's enough to change the economy of this country, which is, of course, relatively small when compared to that of Venezuela. In response to Exxon making this announcement of this oil discovery, Venezuela issued a statement actually asserting ownership of 2/3 of the land of Guyana as well as some of the waters that Guyana claims as well. Now, Venezuela said it was willing to negotiate, but they also established this military zone. Essentially, they're essentially challenging the claim that Guyana has to these oil fields. Now, what's really interesting about this oil discovery is that this oil is different than the heavy crude that we've come to talk a lot about on the news when it comes to Venezuela. Venezuelan crude, it's a hard commodity to come by, but it takes a lot of refining and certifying, whereas the oil that's been discovered in this disputed territory is very high quality and it's very light. So this would be a very, very important commodity for international oil companies. Now, of course, what's notable here is that Chavez and now the Maduro government, these are governments that actually nationalized a lot of oil fields, including some that Exxon used to lay claim to. So what's happening now is that Venezuela is challenging the Guyanese government, whose oil is in control by U.S. oil corporations, and saying, hey, no, this is ours again, this dispute is being reopened, and that's why I think it's important to look at what's happening in this country. So this vote of no confidence that just happened in December, just like to add to what you said before, in January, the high court of the country said that this was valid, and then the Court of Appeals, like you mentioned, said that no confidence motion was not valid. So essentially what happens next in this country is something we need to pay attention to, because there is the possibility of martial law. If the people in this country don't, agree that this government represents them and that they don't want another election because these elections don't represent them, then what's happening on this border will have huge, huge implications.
Absolutely. And the court overturned a ruling of an elected official that the court said shouldn't have ever been able to run for office because he was paid millions of dollars, U.S. dollars, of bribe money.
Right.
Basically swearing his allegiance to the United States. Therefore, he was not swearing his allegiance to his own country. Therefore, he should never have been allowed to be in Parliament in the first place. Thank you for following us, because once again, we might be finding the real intentions of why the U.S. is so much involved in the Venezuelan process.
There's a real prize in that disputed territory.
And it's always the second or third layer we find out possibly the truth is our intention.